Hi, and welcome back to the Quilter's Candy Shop, where you will find sweet treats for the discerning quilter. My name's Carrie, and we are so glad that you are here with us today. We are continuing on with our Rainy Days Quilt Sew-Along. This is week 9 of our Rainy Days Sew-Along, and we are having so much fun creating this beautiful garden quilt. And it's not too late for you to join because YouTube lasts forever. So if you want to go back to the beginning and start over with this series, there's no fee to join. The only requirement is that you purchase the pattern for the cutting and measurement instructions. And you can find this on our website at www.thequilterscandyshop.com. That's SHOPPE shop.com. We also have our country farmhouse colorway still available in kits. Unfortunately, the pastel version is sold out. So today we are going to talk about the sashing. If you've been following along, you already have your sashing pieces cut. This is the backgrounds that go all the way around the quilt block. The next step in the pattern was to cut the posts, but I advised you to not cut out your posts until the end because you wouldn't know for sure how much fabric you would have left depending on what colors you used in your flowers. You should have plenty of every color, and your homework is threefold for this week. Number one, we need to square up and straighten our blocks so that they're roughly all the same size. Number two, you're going to be cutting out all of your corner posts. And number three, we're going to start adding sashing on the side of each block. So let's get started. Our next step is to square up our quilt blocks. In your pattern, on the bottom right-hand corner of each instructions page for each flower is the measurement for which you need to trim your block. Fortunately, our blocks are going to be all the same size. It's important that we straighten our quilt blocks because if it's wonky, too short, too big, off, not straight, by the time we add sashing, more blocks that may or may not be straight, sashing, borders, etc., you can see how exponentially this can get out of control. Also, if you're doing a quilt where you have some embroidery, that can stretch things out of shape. We have quite a lot of bias in some of our blocks, and that's easily stretched. And if your cutting wasn't exactly perfect or your seams weren't exactly a scant quarter-inch, you may have some places off. No matter how great a seamstress you are bound to have some things that are a little bit wonky or not quite straight. And that's okay. We're going to fix that right now. The first thing you're going to do is you're going to take all your blocks to your ironing board and give them a good pressing. These need to be really nice and flat and perfectly pressed. I recommend a little bit of starch to get these as flat as possible. Next, I like to start by just laying it down on my mat and putting it up against a line so I can see kind of what I'm working with and find out whether my block is too big or too small according to the measurements of my pattern. Ideally, the best way to square up a block is if you had a ruler that was bigger, slightly bigger than your quilt block. But we have sort of an odd size and shape, so it's unlikely that you have a ruler big enough for that. If you have an 18.5-inch ruler, that would be great, but that is not a very common ruler. So a really common ruler is this 12.5-inch square. While it's not big enough to go from here to here, it is big enough to cover here. And you could always use the two ruler method. But I have a secret plan. The bottom of our block here, the leaves are not meant to have a point. They're actually a blunt cut, so we don't have to worry about this edge so much. These are where we have the biggest problem. So we're going to turn this around and we're going to deal with the flower. This block and this block are two separate blocks, so we can deal with this block by itself. And now our 12.5-inch ruler is big enough to go all the way around. So we're going to start by lining up the number 1 corner down here in the bottom right. We're going to use this seam line as a nice straight line to work with. The measurement for the width of our block is going to be the same as the measurement for the height of our block to halfway, minus 1/4 of an inch. So we put this number 1 down here in the corner, and we go up here for the measurement for the block, minus 1/4 of an inch, and we put that line right on this seam allowance. Now we can see if we've got extra or we're short in places. You can also use features within your block to help you line up. For example, I can see that this seam line should really be on top of this square. So I can use this square to get this nice and tidy. The other place you need to check before moving on is your outer points. It doesn't really matter so much what is set up in here. Sometimes things are a little crooked, and that's okay, but it is important we get our seam allowance to come right to the tips of our star and not over the top. So check for 1/4 inch to your point. Here is perfect. Here is perfect. Here it's a little bit short, but I have plenty of room. Here I'm good. Here my point comes out a little further. Now I have two options here. I can take this seam apart and take a little bigger bite so that my point comes down here, or I can use a little thinner seam allowance. The better idea is to fix it, but sometimes we don't have the time or the attention span to do that. So you can just use a shorter seam allowance in order to get to that point. This one looks pretty good, so I think I'm good to go. You're going to then cut this side right here. Cut this one because I'm happy with its placement. It's not very much that comes off, but it's just enough to cause trouble when you're trying to line up that sashing. Just like that. And right here, I'm good right to there. And then I can slide this up, and I know that this line is a good measurement line, so I can just put another measuring line on that seam allowance, and I can use this measurement on my stem, and I can cut anything extra, and it was actually pretty good. So now that that is straight on this side, turn the block around. I've trimmed this, right? So now I can do the same thing over here. The 1 goes in the bottom right-hand corner. This is not how you would normally trim up a block. This is specific to these blocks, so don't use this instruction for future blocks that are square, because you would do this differently to square up a regular block. So now I know I can put my line right here for my measurement that the pattern calls for. I can use this line right here. Remember to subtract 1/4 inch for the square part of the block. And I want to check my points. I already know that that was in line, and it is still. And just straighten everything up. And now I don't really have anything to cut here, but I'm going to run my rotary cutter along there anyway. And if I had more to cut up here, I don't on this one. I would just slide this up, put this seam allowance line on here, and finish cutting, but I already knew that I was short there. So that is how you're going to square up all of these odd shaped long blocks. Now let me show you what to look for on each one. I showed you this one because the most important thing is these points, and this is the hardest one to do. I recommend you start with the easiest one, which is the heart block. Now I've already put my sashing on so that I could show you specifically. This is what your leaves are supposed to look like. They're blunt on the end, so you don't have to worry about the points. And that is the same for all of the blocks. On the heart block, the one place you have to watch for is these points right here. You want a good 1/4 of an inch here. If it's a little longer, it won't be a problem. But what you don't want is it too short. On the poppy, there are no points that are crucial. These are all going to just take care of themselves once the sashing goes on. So this is probably the easiest block to do. This one is very interesting, and I was anxious to show you this one because this point is important. Make sure you've got a full 1/4 inch here. But this one, see, I have the sashing on here just so you can see. The point that you want to make sure that you're going to match up is this triangle right here. But this is a blunt edge because it's a wide block. So you will probably have a straight edge here, but your point will be for your triangle. And so when you're lining up, it's going to come to the point here, and it's going to give you a straight edge for the bottom part. Now this one looks like it could be a problem child, but really it's not. These points don't match and come together, so you're going to have a flat edge on all the sides, and so you don't have to worry about the points. This is another one where it's pretty simple. The only place you have to worry about points is here. If you want to make sure that your seam allowance that you take on your sashing is good enough to leave you a 1/4 of an inch. This one looks like there's nothing to worry about here, but the place that you do have a point to match is right here. So make sure you've got a 1/4 of an inch right here, and you are good to go. But this one is our hardest one, and that's why I showed you this one on the actual trimming, because you've got quite a lot of points to match up. But I have faith in you, and I know you can do it. If you have any questions on squaring up your blocks, put them in the comment below. Now, I do have one that is a real problem child, so let's talk about that. All right, and here is my problem child. I must have been doing this one while I was half asleep, because this is a full 1/2 of an inch off. And so this one cannot be trimmed. It must be repaired. And so when I look, I can see that this seam allowance is nearly 3/8 of an inch. This seam allowance is also too wide, and this one is fine, but you know, that happens on occasion, so I will have to take these out at least to halfway, re-sew them, and then this will stand up a little more straight. So I'll do that, and I'll come back and we will trim it. All right, and here I have fixed my flower. I'm going to line everything up. I'm lining up on my stem, I'm lining up on this bar, and I've got a nice clean edge to cut. And just like that, that's all I need off of this side. And then slide my ruler down here and cut. And now the other side. This looks much better. I line that up and cut. And then this is the only part, it's just like a little 1/8 of an inch. I've cut it. All right, that's all we need to do here. Now, when your block is a little too big, it's super easy. You line everything up and you cut off what's extra. But when your block is too small, then that's when we have issues. So what I like to do is to use freezer paper. Freezer paper is paper on one side, and then it's got a wax coating on the other side. And what we're going to do is cut a piece of freezer paper the size that the block is supposed to be. So I'm going to cut this out with paper scissors. Don't use your good scissors on this. Put your block right side up on your wax paper with the wax side up. And you're going to press this with your iron and adhere that wax paper to the back of your block. Put a couple pins in here and here so it doesn't shift when you're getting to your ironing board, and give that a good press, and I'll meet you back here. Here I have my wax paper pressed onto the back of my block, and now you can see where I have some scant seam allowances that I'm going to have to pay attention to. It's okay if this is short, as long as there's a good 1/8 of an inch of fabric inside the seam allowance. And here's the beauty of it. The wax paper gives you a line to match up your sashing piece, because we want your sashing piece to have 1/4 of an inch. And if you measure it down here, then it'll make this, when it folds out, it'll make this too big. So you need the line like this, like this. Now you can see it matches up. Once you have your freezer paper and your seams done, you can just tear off your freezer paper. I'm not going to tear this one off exactly, but I'll show you how easy it does come off, just like that. But I still have a sashing. To put on this side, and so I'm going to leave my freezer paper on. So that is the slick trick to squaring up a quilt block that is too small. If you come to a point where you have more paper than seam allowance, then you are going to have to do some replacement or repair. And that leads us to the next step. All right, so we're moving on to our corner posts. And in your pattern, when you open it up, the first page, you flip it over, it tells you how many squares you need and the size that you need them. We need 35 squares, but I recommend that you cut 2 of every fabric that you have left. And if you like a particular fabric, cut 3 if it fits in trimming up your fabric. There's no rules, but I would cut extra, because unless you're laying it out exactly as it is here, you may need to move some squares around according to the colors of your blocks. So what I did is, I really want a lot of red on mine, so I cut 3 of each one of my reds, and then I cut 2 of everything else. I didn't cut this because I think this is going to be too light, and this one reads too dark for me. And then I didn't cut this one because I didn't want the vertical lines, and so I cut all of these and all of these. And these are the only 2 greens that I have left. Actually, I had 3 greens. One of them I love so much, I cut all of it. That's this one. I actually cut 8 of these because I absolutely love this print. So you can, it's flexible. You can make as many or as less as you want. If you have a particular print that you think is the best, and you can get them out of what's left over, you can cut all of your blocks out of one fabric. And that will have a nice little consistency in amongst the scrappiness of the flowers. Okay, that's it. Cut your posts, and then we will move on to the next step. I've got all my posts cut, and I've got all my flowers trimmed and squared. So the next step is to start putting on the sashing. We're going to do this before we have to worry about layout. Our O sashing is cut the length that our flowers are supposed to be. So you can take this whole stack of flowers to your sewing machine with your whole stack of O pieces. You are just going to go through your whole stack, chain piecing, and putting a sashing on the right side of every block, and then pressing it out. That's the only thing you have to do. As usual, I'm going to advise you when you're putting on the sashing to put it on the bottom, match it up, sew, and by putting it on the bottom, you're going to be able to make corrections. So right here you can see I'm going to have to go, this is where I have to have 1/8 of an inch. This reaches all the way across, 1/8 of an inch here. This is all good along here. You're going to put your O piece on the bottom, manage your seam allowances along the top. That's it. It really should only take you no more than a half an hour, but really about 15 minutes to get just the right side sashing on all of your flower blocks. Okay, here I have sewn my sashing strip to the right side of my tulips, and you're going to do this with all of your flower blocks. And of course, we need to set the seam. So we're going to just do a quick press. And here I've layered my flowers on top of each other in order to set this seam, because my ironing board is only so big. And if I put one down in iron, then put it aside and put one down, it takes twice as long. This way, I'm getting them all done at once. Then I'm going to slide everything this way and press this one open. I'm pressing it over. And as we've talked about before, because there's so many seam allowances along here, we're going to press the sashing over. So this works great. Here, I'm going to do this one. I've already set the seam. Now I'm just doing a quick initial press to get all that fabric pressed over, and then I give it a good pressing. Great, and then the last one. Because I have such a small place to work, this is it. This is the whole space I have right here. This is probably how I'm going to do all of mine. I'm going to do one set of flowers at a time, but you can do whatever works for you. All right, get your sashing done, and I'll see you in a minute. Okay, here they all are. All of my flowers, all of them trimmed, and all of them with one sashing strip down the right side of the flowers. Now, you should have 4 strips left. Those are going to go on the left side of the lead flower in each row. So we're going to talk about that next week when we go over laying out our blocks. Okay, well that's it for this week. So here's your homework. First, you're going to square up, trim up, and make nice and neat your flower blocks. Second, you're going to cut all of your posts, and you're going to cut extra so that when we get to the laying out of your blocks, if you want to move some colors around, you don't have to keep picking them up and moving them. You can just take from your extra pile. And that way you can make it exactly the way you want. And then lastly, you are going to add your long sashing strip to the right side of every one of your flowers. Next week, we are going to start on layout. Thanks for joining us at the Quilter's Candy Shop, where you find sweet treats for the discerning quilter. We are so happy that you are here with us today. We hope you come back, and we'll see you next time. Bye.